Seeing Tian come to, Xuan parted his lips slowly, seeming to pull away. However, under such dire circumstances, Tian couldn't care that much anymore. He raised both his arms, circled them around Xuan's neck, and moved to suck back the spiritual powers that Xuan had sucked away. Clearly, Xuan hadn't expected him to do this, and it took him by surprise as spiritual powers flowed back the other way. Afraid that he was going to break away, Tian cupped his face with his hands, flipped their bodies over, and pushed Xuan onto the ground, pressing him down. A wave of cool current poured into his body and streamed down his throat into his stomach, warm and pleasant. Just then, the little wooden door of Puchi's shrine creaked open, and a giant green caterpillar-like shadow crawled out of the shrine. What the f***? Which son of a bitch is this bold? A thieving punk? You dare come to my house to steal and disturb my slumber? This ancestor's going to show you a thing. He trailed off when he saw the two outside the shrine, who looked like they were wrapped in each other's arms, kissing fervently and passionately, their silhouettes overlapping. One red, one white. Who else could they be? Instantly, he shrieked. Xuan raised his hand and was originally going to grab for Tian's shoulder, but, hearing Qirong make noise, he turned his wrist. Qirong yelped as he was thrown back inside, the door slamming shut behind him with a pang. Only then did Xuan roll them back over again and press down on Tian's body. He lifted his face, his breathing harsh, his eyes dark and shimmering. "Your Highness," he said. Tian didn't have the time to explain. He lifted his arm and hooked it back around Xuan's neck, pulling him down once more. Having sucked enough spiritual power, he choked a cough before crying, "Soul-shifting spell." This time, however, just as his soul was pulled out, before he was even thrown upwards, it was like there was a wall blocking him, and he was heavily rebounded back into his own body. He awed in shock. Opening his eyes, above him was still that starry night sky and the anxious face of Xuan. Tian sat up and hugged his head, murmuring, "I can't pass through anymore." Did Xuan die? Or did Blackwater Demon Xuan reinforce his barrier? No matter what, either way, he couldn't return to Xuan's body. Even if he was to hurry to the South Sea, he'd for sure be too late. Seeing him bemused, Xuan said, "Your Highness, I'm sorry." Tian looked at him. Xuan added, "But outsiders can't possibly interfere in this affair." Tian waved his hand and said, "You don't need to apologize. Truthfully, even if I'm there, I won't be able to do much." With the soul-shifting spell, he could only enter Xuan's body. However, Xuan was no more than mortal, and even if Tian could help him break free of those shackles, how could he possibly fight against the master of the Blackwater Demon Lair? Even escape was impossible. After he'd gathered himself, Tian swiftly returned to the spiritual communication array of the heavens. "Lingwen, have you all set off?" he asked. "Your Highness," Lingwen exclaimed, "how come you just went silent for such a long period of time? We've already dispatched a number of heavenly officials over to the South Sea. His Highness Qi returned, so he will set off in a bit too. But the Blackwater Demon Lair isn't easy to enter. Who knows when we'll find them?" Xuan croaked. Wait, I'll go with you all. Maybe I'll still remember the way. But I'll need to trouble you to send someone to pick me up from Puchi's shrine. Very well, he's just arrived now, Lingwen said. Slightly taken aback, Xuan turned his head back. Huachang had disappeared, but 2 junior officials came forward from Puchi village, and behind them followed a tall, wavy black-haired youth. It was Xuan Yijin. Xuan inclined his head to greet him. Xuan Yijin didn't understand formalities, so he didn't reciprocate the gesture. But Xuan didn't mind. He looked around but didn't see Huachang's shadow anywhere, and he understood that Huachang was giving him room to deal with this affair. The 2 of them and the junior officials left for the South Sea. Following Xuan's suggestion, they went out of their way to gather over 10 hefty coffins that carried the dead to prepare for any unexpected situations. After the ship flew through the waters for over 6 hours, they ran into a bizarre sight upon the surface of the sea. A number of corpses of giant skeleton fish were floating on the sea's surface, and they collided with the ship. Many heavenly officials were instantly alarmed. "Are we there?" they shouted. "That can't be," Xuan said. "If we've already entered the Blackwater demon lair, the ship won't keep afloat on the water and still move this quickly." However, this was clearly the remains from General Pei and the Watermaster's battle the night before. Xuan Yijin was perched on the side railing of the ship, maintaining that high difficulty position, when suddenly he said, "There's a black island ahead. Is that the one?" Xuan focused his eyes, and sure enough, there really was a shadowy island. Also, from afar, it did indeed resemble the Black Water Island. Xuan slightly frowned and said, "It really does look like it. But how can it be found so easily, and the ship didn't sink? Everyone remain vigilant. This might be a trap." But just as the words left his lips, he realized it wasn't a trap. On the beach, there was a figure under the bright sun, slashing at logs with a sacred sword meant for killing enemies, making coffins. On the side, there were already 3 completed coffins, and he was making a 4th just then. Xuan immediately started waving. "General Pei, it's General Pei. It's the island without a doubt," he said. The ship immediately changed direction and steered swiftly over. When Pei Ming saw that reinforcements had arrived, he didn't appear particularly delighted. Instead, he threw his sword onto the ground, then rubbed his nose and said, sounding grim, "You all just had to come just as I finished making these. What the heck?" "It's already amazing that anyone even showed up," Xuan Yijin replied. "When everyone heard it was to save you, no one had time." Pei Ming bore an expression like he didn't want to bother with children and turned to Xuan. "Your Highness, you went back first?" he asked. "How did you build the ship? How can it float on the waters of the demon lair?" "I don't think it's the ship," Xuan said. "The curse of the Blackwater demon lair has dispersed." Taken aback, Pei Ming tested it with his sword. Sure enough, with but one swing, a field of large trees fell. His spiritual powers had returned. Speechless for a moment, Pei Ming shook his head. "Had I known, I wouldn't have worked so hard to build these coffins," he said. It was true that he did labor tirelessly all night. He made coffins for 4, but 3 of them were now useless. The group of heavenly officials entered the island and ran straight for the heart of the forest. The little ghosts, ambushing in the woods, had never seen such a battle formation, and all were scampering away in terror, fleeing left, right, and center. Once they reached the Blackwater Lake within the trees, they didn't run into any invisible creatures. Without the disturbance of foreign spiritual barriers, after some examination, they were able to break the boundary, disperse the illusion, and sure enough, the iron prison and the nether water manor appeared before their eyes. Once they entered the nether water manor, Xuan collected the remains of the black-robed skeleton and tucked it away, holding it in his hands as he ran all over the palace. Soon they found that great hall. Upon that mottled wall, the 2 bloody steel shackles were already empty. A headless corpse lay on the floor in the middle of the hall, its blood already run dry, and a group of madmen were throwing random objects at it. The moment the heavenly officials entered, that group of maniacs became even more excited. When Pei Ming came in, he was stunned for a good while before he finally dared to recognize who that corpse belonged to. Shaken, he exclaimed, "Water Master Xuan." Xuan was already knowledgeable about this and instructed, "Will everyone please search here and over this entire island for Lord Windmaster or his corpse." However, no matter how much they looked, there were no traces of Xuan on the island. Had Blackwater Demon Xuan taken the Windmaster away? Or perhaps the Windmaster was murdered directly, and his dead body sunken into the sea, his flesh devoured by fish. Although Xuan went berserk at the very end and provoked Xuan to kill violently, he was now dead. But he wasn't killed by Xuan's own hands, so would Xuan still switch the Windmaster's fate? Chasing away those irritating madmen, Pei Ming crouched down on the floor and was lost in thought for a long time before he sighed and said, "Water Master Xuan, you've been proud your whole life, but ended up like this. I don't even know if your eyes are closed. Truly, the higher you climb, the harder you fall. Life is full of surprises, and one cannot escape whatever comes. Even when mortals become gods, we do not have the good fortune to avoid fate in the end." Chuan Yijun didn't hold such deep sentiment and ran around soundly within the nether water manor. When he came by, he glanced at the dead body and thought it strange. "Where's the head?" he asked. "It was taken by Blackwater Demon Xuan," Xuan replied. What grudge, what resentment did the demon lair master hold against him? And where's Xuan, Earth Master? Did all 3, water, earth, and wind, officials perish? It was a great grudge, indeed, a great resentment, Xuan said. As for Lord Earthmaster, it depends on which one you're asking after. The real one is in my hands. The fake one was the one who took away Lord Watermaster's head. "What?" General Pei asked. Xuan eyed him and said softly, "General Pei didn't know, right? Blackwater Demon Xuan's real name was He. His courtesy name is Xuan." Hearing this, Pei Ming's face changed slightly. It seemed that Pei Ming and Ling Wen weren't completely in the dark with regard to the things Shawudu had done. Only just how much they knew wasn't known. Everything that had to be reported was reported. Everything that needed to be dealt with was dealt with. When Xuan returned to Puchi village an entire day had passed. Xuan's steps were weary with exhaustion. When he returned to Puchi's shrine and opened the door, he could hear Qirong barking and yelling. Huachang, you f***er! Xuan, you dog f***er! Have you two no shame? Ah, what the hell was that in the middle of the night? I'm f***ing horrified. This Grandmaster's eyes are f***ing blinded. You f***ing owe me. There were nothing but vulgarities and profanities coming out of his mouth. Xuan was immediately reminded of the terrifying image of how he and Huachang took turns holding each other down on the ground, sucking powers the night before. He didn't think it embarrassing at the time, but now he couldn't escape. He almost threw the door shut to flee. Huachang was leaning his chair back, his boots crossed and stacked on the table. But the moment he heard Xuan push the door to enter, he put his legs down and casually smacked the back of Qirong's head, knocking him out. He rose to his feet. "Gurgur," he said. Xuan nodded and closed the door behind him. He stepped over Qirong, who was bound like a little green worm on the ground, and sat down. "Did Guzi and Lan Ying go out to play?" he asked. "Yeah, I let them out," Huachang said. "You've worked hard." "No, you're the one who worked hard," Xuan said. Huachang smiled, then he said, "I had thought that Gurgur would blame me." Xuan shook his head and said, "Sanlang doesn't need to think so much. I really don't. In fact, you are right about this whole thing. Outsiders really can't possibly interfere." After some thought, he still asked, "Sanlang, what do you think that Blackwater Demon Xuan will do to Lord Windmaster?" Huachang was silent for a moment before he answered, "I don't know either. Blackwater is someone rather eccentric. He's endured by himself for too many years. No one can know what he's thinking." Xuan suddenly remembered that this was also the same remark that many of the heavenly officials in the upper court had given regarding Crimson Rain Swordflower. Ship-sinking Blackwater emerged from Mount Tonglu, slaughtering millions of ghosts. Crimson Rain Swordflower was the same. Xuan had endured years by himself. The time Huachang endured alone couldn't be any less. What made the ship-sinking Blackwater of today was hatred. Then, what about Crimson Rain Swordflower? What made Huachang the Huachang of today? In an instant, much flashed in Xuan's mind. He shook his head, discarding that noble, gracious, special someone, and organized his thoughts. "But, Sanlang," he said, "there's something I don't understand. This whole business with the Watermaster committing fraud. It should have been done quite covertly. His deception lasted for so long, so how did Blackwater learn the truth? If it's not convenient for you to answer, you don't have to respond. He's fled and moved his domain and even dropped the fake Heavenly Official Act. So what's there to be inconvenient over?" Huachang replied. "It's simple, actually. The night that Blackwater died, Shawudu went to confirm his death." "Because only when the prey is dead would the reverend of empty words find its next target?" Xuan asked. "Yeah," Huachang responded. Blackwater didn't know who that person was, but he remembered his face. It was only after he became a ghost and knew more of the affairs of heaven and earth that he discovered that that man was the water god. No wonder that this was puzzling. Why would an esteemed water god go observe how a mortal died out of the blue? Xuan asked, but this shouldn't make him think of changing fates. Xuan replied, that's why he impersonated the real Earthmaster and infiltrated the heavens to investigate. Pretty brave, if I must say so myself. If not, for killing the real Earthmaster afterward and dragging in over 200 fishermen, then he really can be called courageous and clever, Xuan said. However, Xuan responded, Gogo, I don't know if the real Earthmaster was killed by him, but I'm afraid that the one who dragged those fishermen into the stormy East Sea is someone else.